And we are live.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us in this week's happy hour. First, a couple of just housekeeping things. We just want to say that we're super excited to be getting your Reed Quintet miniatures, and we're looking forward to those. The deadline, just as a reminder, is July 1st, and go to our website for more information and to submit those compositions. So this week is super special for me. This week we have a guest, Dr. Mike Harley, Associate Professor of Bassoon at the University of South Carolina, where I studied with him. And he's also the artistic director of Southern Exposure New Music Series and the founding member, one of the founding members of Alarm Will Sound. So welcome, Dr. Harley. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again. It's an honor to talk to you guys, and I appreciate what you all are doing with your quintet.
Great. So let's just start with just talking a little bit more about your background in chamber music and solo bassoon, because you've done a lot of both. So we just want to hear a little bit about that.
Sure. So, I think I got started like you all with chamber music. Well, maybe you may have started earlier than I did, but probably my first chamber music experiences were actually in college. I went to a really small liberal arts school in northern Indiana called Goshen College, and got placed immediately with a wind quintet when I first got there. At the time, I didn't start out as a music major. I wasn't all that serious about the bassoon, I suppose, in some respects. It was sort of a fun thing to do on the side, but I recalled very distinctly, for example, the process of rehearsing some of the quintets out of the Andro, that famous, the orange or yellow book or whatever color you have encountered. If you're a wind player, we know this book. And then really memorably later on, getting to play the Mozart piano quintet. That piece made a big impression. I remember getting up and as you all are, we were very busy, and when do we rehearse? So kind of getting up and being in at school by like 7:30 in the morning or something, and thinking, oh, I don't have to do this. But then the feeling of starting out with like the slow movement of the Mozart piano quintet, I'll never forget how absolutely perfect it was in terms of what a thrill to begin the day with, music like this. And so that was probably my first chamber music experience that really made a strong impression and kind of hooked me on it. And then, just continued playing with ad hoc groups. I was never in a super serious single group like you guys were until Alarm Will Sound, which was when I was doing my doctorate. It's funny. I think more people are doing groups that stick together. I am thinking of it as a bigger part of their career than at least I was until I got to Eastman and was doing my doctorate there. Before then, it just seemed like kind of a part of things, but I don't even know if it would have occurred to me to say, oh, I'm going to start my own chamber ensemble. It certainly would not have occurred to me to think I want to focus only on, primarily on contemporary music, for example, in a group. And so those things were not in the air as much as they are now. And probably it wasn't until I got to Eastman that I first really started getting super serious about chamber music. Before then, it was ad hoc ensembles. It was something, though, that I always loved. And I think from the beginning, like you all, I realized, man, this is probably where it's at. This is the best thing I can think of doing when it comes to music. I love playing with other people and having the control that you can have in a chamber ensemble, probably as opposed to sometimes being in an orchestra. So I knew that it was something I always wanted to do for fun. I never maybe didn't imagine at the time how much part of my life it would become, but I'm certainly glad it did. So.
Definitely.
So how did the group Alarm Will Sound form? And do you have any tips for anyone out there trying to create their own chamber group?
Sure. I mean, Alarm Will Sound formed, it grew out of an organization at Eastman that's actually still there, that was started by two students there at the time who are also still with Alarm Will Sound. So Alan Pearson, our conductor, and we are kind of a hybrid group. I mean, we are a conducted ensemble. It's a sinfonietta size, 16, 17 players. And we do typically use a conductor. So depending on how you define chamber music, but I think we look at ourselves as a chamber music ensemble, and many of our projects bear that out. But anyway, Alan Pearson, our conductor, Gavin Chuck, who is now our executive director and was our managing director for many years, started a student-run organization at Eastman called OSEA that presents contemporary music. So they would essentially survey students and take project proposals and then try to make them happen, right? And so then that was not, of course, then a fixed ensemble, but was rather more like a presenting organization that got together the players for each project they thought was particularly exciting. And when they were there, one of the people, they did do some fundraising and tap into some grants and some money that Eastman had available. And were able to get the composer Steve Reich to come out to campus and be a part of a production of his music that they had organized as a part of OSEA. And I know Steve, when he was there, suggested, hey, you guys need to keep doing this. There's not I can't think of an organization in the US that's sort of the equivalent of Ensemble into Contemporain in France, Ensemble Moderne in Germany, these sort of larger groups, like kind of chamber orchestra sized ensembles. And so that was kind of that I think they may have had that idea already, but that sort of sparked more of an interest, and helped get us going. But initially it was project based, and then the decision was made to say let's do a set instrumentation here, because we don't want to be an ad hoc collective of players. We want to make this is about the people in the group. We care about each other. We want to work closely together, and we don't want to be a pool of 30 or 40 people that changes from time to time. And so early on, again, that decision about our identity was made. It's a difficult model as such a large group to sustain, actually, because when you think about it, it's just too many people to be practical to
Right.
try to tour with easily and all of these things. But we felt like the strength of the brand and the distinctiveness of it, and the fact that there wasn't something like that, all spoke for the solidity of the idea of trying to make it happen as a larger kind of conducted / chamber group. And so took the instrumentation of pieces like the Ligeti Piano Concerto, for example, which was one of the first pieces we played together in maybe the configuration that most of the founding members were in. That was back in like 2001, 2002. So sorry, I hope that's not too long-winded of an answer, but that's kind of how the group began. And in terms of advice, I mean, well, first of all, again, you guys are doing so well, and you're off to a good start. And I think what one can sense immediately, I haven't met you guys, but in person but you seem very friendly and you care about each other, and you got to pick, people initially that not only are stellar players, and you can't have, as you probably realize, I suppose what you might say is a weak link as a player. You've got to, of course, choose people that are all very strong, because you might think you can get away with something like that if you love someone, but maybe their playing is not at the level of the others. But I think over time that will just cause too much friction, become too problematic. And I think a lot of groups split near the beginning because of sort of inequalities in that regard. But also then, of course, you got to choose people that you really like and are friends with, ideally. And I think that those two ingredients, if they're there, are the foundation. It helped us gain some notoriety and get some of our very biggest first concerts and sort of set us on our way. And that can be hard, as to there's a tipping point, I think, as an ensemble, right, where you try to land actually paying gigs, and you don't, and people start to maybe seek you out a tiny bit as a group instead of you having to do all the legwork, and we didn't reach that tipping point for quite a while. We spent some years sleeping on floors and not really getting paid much of anything, but we did, because we attached ourselves in some way to a famous composer, Steve Reich. I know he helped get some of those early gigs for us in more prestigious venues. Maybe one of our first was at the Miller Theater which is Columbia University's theater in New York City. And if you get a review in the New York Times and you get some high profile gigs, that can send you on your way. And so I think Steve Reich fortunately was able to kind of help us get our feet in the door. But I can't say we got really paid much of anything for those early gigs either. And still, maybe this is getting ahead of where we're going in the interview, but still need to depend a lot on our own fundraising to make the group financially viable. So, yeah. So, make sure you care about each other as people. You're all great players. I'm sure you are. And, attach yourself to a famous composer. Try that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Those are some of the things that probably help.
Thank you.
Well,
now that you're various different players have teaching jobs or different performing careers, what is your process for balancing Alarm Will Sound with your full-time teaching job and any other chamber music pursuits or orchestral pursuits that you have?
Constant struggle. That's my I think honestly what's hardest for me is to achieve like more of a life balance, right, between family and work and personal, like physical health and all those three things. I feel like I can do okay at maybe two of those at a time, and then the third is always impossible or something. But I think in terms of achieving balance as a musician, well, the job I have makes a group like Alarm Will Sound completely ideal, because we are not an ensemble that is a string quartet, for example, that may be able to constantly tour and play 100 or 150 or more concerts a year, right? We might get together 10 to 12 times a year and do 15 total concerts at the most, between 10 and 15 shows, for example, a year. And that's about right for someone like myself, who, I don't depend on Alarm Will Sound for my primarily as my main financial source, right? It's a part of that puzzle, but I do have a college teaching job, and that sort of a job actually values a group like Alarm Will Sound. It, I'm sure, helped in the tenure process. It brings me invaluable experiences that I can share with my students as a teacher and a player. It helps me hopefully garner some contacts in the larger music world that ultimately, hopefully, will also help my students. So it's sort of a group like Alarm Will Sound, and I think a group like your group can be perfect for an academic job like I have, or a full-time college teaching job, as long as I don't miss too much school. And that can be hard, is making sure I balance the amount of time I'm gone with not sacrificing the quality of education that students are getting. And that's just a constant thing. Every semester I try to sit down and miss, for example, no more than 3 weeks total, and make sure I have some plan to cover those times. I mean, that's my very general guideline. I do think I can usually tell when if I'm gone too much, my students, feel like I'm losing touch with where they're at, and that, doesn't feel good. So I've learned over the years how many gigs I feel like I can try to play in a particular semester. But balance, it's always a work in progress, and it's always changing. And I think everyone sort of has to be open to taking all kinds of opportunities as they come your way, and then gradually you can sort of fine tune, and the later you are in your career, you can be a little more selective about which opportunities to take. I often now can't and don't. I would rather be with my daughters and my family and doing things with them. I think that's more important right now. And so I haven't done that many, say, church gigs in Columbia or orchestral gigs in the region, because not always because I can't do them actually, but because I need to prioritize my family right now. I wouldn't have been able to make that choice when I was your age, probably, because you don't want to turn down possible connections that will ultimately help going forward. So that's changed as I've gotten older and maybe a little more established, So.
Absolutely. So just balancing the
Yeah,
difference,
yeah.
your
For
family,
me,
students.
yeah. And you guys, maybe you probably don't have families yet, and so but yeah, that certainly does become a big part of that balancing equation too, and that's important. I mean, I actually feel like it's valuable for me to model to my students, that family is important, right? Because I want to be like a real person. And so, yeah, I think ultimately students respect that if you prioritize family time as well. So, yeah.
Right. And they probably
Yeah.
appreciate you making up lessons, like
Yeah.
being proud of where you are and that you're out in the world, but
Right.
then knowing that you're going to prioritize them and give them
Yeah,
that
I hope
time.
so. And maybe
Yeah.
Bridget could speak more on this. I hope I did a good job of balancing those things when she was there. It's it's just a constant work. I do think that I'm glad that I teach. Like, I think it'd be difficult if I was in a position where actually, say, I was a full-time player in an orchestra and also teaching. It would be a little harder for me to give my students as much as I do. Whereas no, my main income is University of South Carolina. That's what I really enjoy doing, and I want to prioritize that and be there as much as I can for my students. So I do think I'm able to hopefully do that a little easier than if I was, for example, an adjunct professor and had a million other things going on, or a full-time orchestra player. And not to say that those sorts of folks can't be wonderful teachers as well. Of course, many are, but I think it's just a little, I'm glad that I'm able to kind of prioritize my students when it comes to my working life. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I can definitely say that you did a good job of that. Even when you were, you missed a week, you'd come back and you'd have us over to your house for makeup lessons on like a Saturday morning, and you'd make us pancakes. So I definitely remember doing that in reclass at your house when we needed makeups, or if I came panicking to you before an audition. You always made time. So I think you can take comfort in knowing that you're definitely doing a good job with that.
Oh, thank you. That's good to hear.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. All right, so let's move on now to a sort of a different topic. I'd like to hear a little bit about your background with Dark in the Song and running the New Bassoon Festival. How was Dark in the Song formed? What is your mission? And how did that sort of lead to the New Bassoon Institute?
Yeah, so Dark in the Song was formed. I was actually just trying to think about this. It's been a while. I think, whenever the Provo conference was, the International Double Reed Society conference, that was back, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or something.
Yeah.
And I remember meeting Saxton Rose at that convention, and we struck up a friendship there and realized, of course, that we both teach relatively close to each other in the Carolinas. He is at North Carolina School of the Arts. And so we started talking about collaboration possibilities, but also possibilities to bring in some other like-minded people in the bassoon world. And so then Lynn is an old friend from Eastman, actually was teaching at West Virginia. Rachel Elliott was at the time at Duke, and Peter Kolke was actually my predecessor at the University of South Carolina. And so those were sort of just obvious people to wrap in that were all in the Southeast. And we wanted to we all believed in playing music by living composers and the importance of kind of hopefully commissioning and getting new material written. for bassoons, both multiple bassoons and any kind of bassoon-centric ensemble, really. And so there just happened to be 5 of us, actually. We didn't set out to become a quintet per se, but just seemed like there are 5 people in the region that would really work for this. So we kind of, I guess, think of ourselves more as a collective of players. We're not maybe all involved on every piece that we commissioned. For example, we've commissioned a number of quartets, right? Bassoon quartets and things like that. But we also wanted to, maybe there was a tiny bit of, we felt, I guess, like a lot of bassoon quartet music in particular, or quintet music for bassoon ensembles, was just sort of silly. Like, not that there's not a time and a place for that, like arrangements of, Beatles music or Latin grooves or Star Wars or whatever the case may be. It can be really fun. But we also felt like there wasn't a lot of kind of more serious music that took the bassoon kind of seriously as a voice, or wasn't just arrangements of pre-existing tunes or whatever, right? And so
Right.
that was, a real, like, I think that was the aesthetic underpinning of the ensemble. And so starting there, we just started contacting composers. I just know or have come into contact with many composers through Alarm Will Sound, particularly through our summer festival in Missouri that happens each year, which is really a festival based or for composers. And so anyway, some of the initial connections for the music that has been written for Dark in the Song came through composers that I knew from that festival. Composers are often willing to write for you if you only ask, so you just have to ask, and maybe you can often find a way to make that work. So that's sort of where that started, and we sort of were subsumed at some point by the Rushes ensemble. Dana Jessen, who's the wonderful bassoonist, again, teaches actually in entrepreneurship at Oberlin, has a bassoon repertoire commissioning project. She wanted to commission a big piece by Michael Gordon, and she reached out to us to see if we wanted to be involved in that project. And 4 out of the 5 of us were were able to be able to do that. Peter wasn't able to do it, but the rest of us were. And so then 4 of us became part of that 7-member ensemble. That's the Rushes ensemble that plays this big concert-length piece by Michael Gordon. So a lot of the Dark in the Songs playing over the past years has been kind of, I suppose, it's often part of the Rushes ensemble. And at times Peter's been able to play Rushes now too with us, which has been kind of fun. If not all of the original 7 have been there. So yeah, that's I guess how, in a nutshell, how Dark in the Song started.
That's a perfect lead into our next question about Rushes.
Yeah.
Lara.
Yeah, I was wondering what it was like to perform a piece of that length and to put that piece together and rehearse it and be part of the world premiere.
Exhausting.
Yeah.
No. Frightening.
Yeah. It's probably not, it's not like in C where you can stop, right? Or,
right.
I don't know.
Not at all. No, you stop, you're gone. And I'll have a terrifying story that maybe I've told Bridget about the world premiere of that piece. But yeah, so we started, a few people who were in New York at the time, I think Dana and maybe Lynn and Rachel were able to went and saw Michael and like just kind of played the bassoon a little for him. So he was trying to formulate what's this piece going to be. And so he got to hear the sonority of the instrument up close and think about it and the range. And eventually, I'm not quite sure why he ended up with 7 as the number of players he decided to write for. That was his choice. I think probably because you can have a chord of every note that it's in, say, any diatonic pitch, right? And a scale would have 7 notes, for example. That's one possibility. But anyway, and he wanted a piece that is somewhat like his piece Timber for percussion that has these repeated kind of phrases that revolve around in a circle You can almost see the sound moving. Anyway, he developed this piece just entirely by himself then after hearing some folks at his apartment, and sent it to us. And I remember getting my part and thinking, oh my God, what is this? It's, just pages and pages and pages and pages, of course, of 21 pages or something like that of repeated notes, basically, with a few rests here and there, And so we ended up getting together on Edisto Island, which is in South Carolina. My wife's uncle has a place there, and we were trying to find some kind of relatively isolated spot we could get together and rehearse it for the first time and see what it was like. So we tried to learn our parts as best we could, but it's sort of an impossible piece to practice. If you can imagine just repeated swells of repeated notes and rest, and then do it again. And the lengths keep changing of the notes, but it's no technical licks whatsoever. Mainly, we needed to get into physical shape, great physical shape to play.
A long tone exercise.
Yeah, it really is. It is a long tone exercise, and it's a great one, and it's or a tonguing exercise, both really. And so, anyway, we got there and we read the piece, and we first started, without a click track of any kind or anything. We just went in and tried to read this thing, and it very quickly became obvious how cumbersome that would be. You all basically had to conduct our way through every beat to try to stay together. There are a lot of weird overlapping rhythms. And again, when you hear a stream of 16th notes that are smooth, it's very hard to tell where beats are and everything. And so, it became obvious quickly that it'd be a really hard piece to play, without some sort of a click. So when we first, sorry, excuse me, can you close the door? Sorry. My daughter just got home. God only knows where she's been. So we used a metronome then, like a really loud metronome, to practice it that whole first few days that we were playing. And our first performance was with one of, again, Jen's Uncle Johnny's neighbors. We went over to their house. They have this lovely place on Edisto, because we wanted to kind of play it for some people and record it for Michael. And actually he came down there too for some of these rehearsals too, which was really cool to have him out there listening. Because, I think he had no idea what the thing was really going to sound like either before we, at least it's a little hard to tell on MIDI, So anyway, we went and played it. We literally played it with a metronome, just clanking away for the first performance. And then we made a click track for it, so that we could perform it, and not only to stay together, but also to not get lost as individuals. So we have cues on the click that say letter T or repeat 2 or whatever the case may be. Many repeats in the piece, and it's very easy to get lost in there. And what do you know, the first world premiere performance at MPAC in New York State, up in Troy, New York, the click track crashed about 20 minutes in. And fortunately it was right after we'd finished recording it. So we went up there to record it and premiere it, which is kind of cool. And we somehow all ended together. I don't know if we were together the entire time, but we ended up, immediately. It was really probably the most terrifying moment on stage I've ever had, because it was a high pressure performance, and when your click goes out, you didn't know if it was the only click that went out, or if so what if everyone else has their click and I don't, but it quickly became obvious that everyone was starting to hyperventilate at the same time on stage. You're kind of peeking around, and people are starting to move a lot more. And so we all realized fairly quickly that the click was just gone. And once it was gone, you couldn't get it back. And so we had to play the next 40 minutes or whatever without it. And we're just beating through. And it's supposedly such a smooth, placid kind of swells throughout. And I'm sure the effect of that was destroyed. I can't bring myself to even go listen to that recording. I'm sure it's out there somewhere. But that was really a terrifying experience. But fortunately, we did made it. We made it to the end. We were together most of the time. We kind of ended together. We were just must have looked a little ridiculous. So
Gotta love
that's the only time that
technology.
happened.
You
Yeah.
gotta love technology,
Oh man.
wonderful when it works.
Yeah, and it proved the dictum again that you never change anything between the dress rehearsal and the concert. You never, no matter what, because I think they ran it from a different program, right? They ran it from Pro Tools instead of QuickTime or something, and in the
Sure.
concert itself. And what do you know? So, but anyway, I digress.
You should perform it again.
Yeah, well, we should try. We could do it. It's more doable now without a click than it ever because we played it so many times. But it's not a matter actually being able to do it as much as it is a matter of being able to do it beautifully and well. It kind of messes up the vibe of the piece to see all these bassoons like bouncing up and down the whole time, and it's not as easy to play it smoothly and beautifully. So yeah, it's really actually at this point a musical rather than a practical decision to do it with a click. So
it's good for COVID times for performing
Yes.
it over.
Yeah.
You could you're ready. Like you don't even have to make the click.
That's a great idea, actually. And I wonder if anyone in the bassoon world is taking up the challenge of trying to do that with a cappella or something.
Do it.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Not gonna be me. I'll tell you that much right now. I'm not that much of a glutton for punishment. That's an exhausting piece. So
Yeah.
But I liked you guys's. I saw that you did the Mellets, right? The Red Pine movie.
Yeah.
That was
Red
cool.
Pine.
Red Pine.
Oh, very nice. Very nice.
That piece is really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a bop for sure.
Well, I think I love this ensemble. I've never actually played in a reed quintet. I mean, those weren't around when I was a student. It never occurred to me. And so, actually, Dana Jessen, the woman who started Rush's, right, the Rush's ensemble, one of her teachers is the bassoonist in Califax. Actually, so we met him when he actually heard us practice Rush's over there in Amsterdam. Alban, I believe is his name. Anyway, so small world.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Dr. Harley, moving on to the next question, would you mind sharing how did you divide up responsibilities with finances and planning of the new Bassoon Institute, as well as fees with recordings, etc.?
So like the financial angle for both the Institute, but other stuff as well, or?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Yeah.
Sure. So with regards to playing and regarding recordings, I have typically tapped into funding from the University of South Carolina. And so that if you're affiliated with a university of some kind, they're going to often have funding sources, and that involves writing grants and things like that. But if you can write a compelling rationale for why I need to commission and record music, that can happen. And so, for example, I did recently release a solo CD, and all of that was paid for by a grant from the university. Many other commissions, honestly, when I was younger, and when I just would ask composers, hey, would you like to write a piece for bassoon or bassoon quartet or whatever the case may be, and what we can't promise to pay you, or maybe we could pay you $200, right? We'll each chip in $50 or something, but what we can promise to do is play it a certain number of times, and composers will get not only then hopefully a little bit more out into the world that way, but also they can then get money if they're affiliated with ASCAP or something like that, right? Composers will get paid whenever their piece is performed. And so you can kind of make bargains with composers that there's more kinds of value, of course, than just money, right? There are different kinds of value. And so one value, maybe I was fortunate to be attached with with Alarm Will Sound at the time is they could say, well, this guy who plays with a well-known ensemble is going to play my piece, and maybe that would help other people get interested in playing their music, and they could use then recordings to apply for grants themselves. Composers, of course, they're good at finding grants. They know about grants, so sometimes composers have helped find grant funding. But a lot of times student composers in particular will write for free. And you got to be respectful and not abuse that privilege. They're the creators here, and they're investing so much important work. It's important to try to find some financial help for them if possible. But again, sometimes there's value to just getting the piece out there and playing it a lot for a composer who hasn't had as much exposure. So those are some of the ways that we've been able to get funding for pieces, both grants with universities, but other institutions as well, or just begging composers to write for free with the guarantee of some performances. With the institute, or now we're calling it the New Bassoon Workshop. It just seems more like a workshop than an institute, maybe a little less formal. So moving forward, we're probably going to we're calling it a workshop. We again wanted to found something that was sustainable, and we first actually did it at Eastman, but there were just some issues with that model. Folks had to actually register at Eastman. It didn't financially make quite as much sense. It was harder to get people up there to Rochester in some ways. And fortunately, we were able to attach ourselves with the National Music Festival purely through personal connections. My wife has been teaching flute there for many years, and I knew Caitlin Patton, who is one of the directors of the festival, and she was gracious enough to kind of take us on. And so that is sort of sustained partly by student fees. Students pay what we hope is a really reasonable fee. They are put up free in lodging there, which is provided by the National Music Festival. There is a built-in audience in the town. So in many ways, it was sort of an ideal place to start to grow a contemporary bassoon institute. And so we kind of moved from Eastman to Chestertown, Maryland, to the National Music Festival, which has been a really good fit. And that, we're not this is not a money-making endeavor really so much for the faculty members. Our checks, whatever we get paid, is purely dependent on how many students end up registering, and we split the money with the National Music Festival, that sort of thing. But again, that's more about, for us, the opportunity to kind of help grow this contemporary music bassoon world and help get other folks interested in contemporary music and contemporary techniques for the instrument. Alarm Will Sound depends on a lot of fundraising, actually, right? From private donors who are interested in the ensemble, through a lot of grants that are available through the Copeland Foundation and all sorts of different grants for music groups and ensembles and projects. And sometimes having a particular project will help get particular grants, right? So we have a project that helps collect and premiere works by underrepresented composers. And a project like that will sometimes be able to find sources of funding that a more typical commissioning project might not be able to find, right? So sometimes choosing a project that's targeted around like education or community engagement or underserved communities in some ways, those kind of things can be easier to find funding for, at least grant funding, and often private funding as well, than if you just say, I want money for a group because we're really cool, like you gotta have like a project, something that excites people and hopefully is maybe socially important as well. And those sorts of things can help. Again, once the ball is rolling, these things become easier. Once it's unfortunate, like it's a lot easier for an organization that has won big grants to get the next big grant, right? Because the granting organization is like, oh, they're successful. We know they're going to carry through. They're going to really do a great job with this project. we can trust them. They're like a proven entity. What's harder is to get started and get that first big grant. Because again, it's a bit of a, you'd like to think that, well, these granting organizations, they must prioritize the groups that are the ones that don't have it, right? They're the ones that need it. But it's not always true. I mean, again, they often want proven entities. They want you to show that you're going to be able to pull off these projects. And so getting the ball rolling is the hardest. Once you get those first things, then the process does become easier. It's the same with a music series like Southern Exposures that I do, which I'm sure we'll talk about. So, did that help answer some of your questions?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, money's the hard thing. It's always hard. We want to. And be able to fund projects that are artistically satisfying. So, yeah.
All right, great. So you sort of alluded to the next topic, Southern Exposure,
Yes.
and running your own concert series and how all that worked out. So could you talk a little bit just about the concert series, what it is, where the inspiration came from, and how it was made into a reality?
Sure. So the concert series itself was started in 2001 by a composer who still teaches, and a good friend of mine who still teaches at the University of South Carolina, John Fitzrogers. And John initially actually was kind of looking at forming a student new music group, really, to play student works and composers' works, but it ended up becoming sort of a series that sometimes does home produced concerts, but often will bring in ensembles as well. And when I was, in 2006, I think the first time I really went to the University of South Carolina was with Alarm Will Sound to play on John's series. And I'll never forget how crazy that was. It was, it's in a fairly small auditorium, and we have 16 or 17 players on stage, and the stage was packed, but the hall was more packed. There was people sitting in the aisles and just practically hanging from the rafters, and we just didn't expect that. We didn't know what to expect, right? And we were floored by the intensity of the enthusiasm of the audience. And then just a couple years later, I ended up coming to USC to teach, and so I then was like, wow, that's pretty cool that I'm going to go teach at this school where I remember that performance. That was really memorable. And, and I think that being in Alarm Will Sound helped me get the position I initially at the university. And so part of my initial contract was to help John with the series. So I started as assistant director of the series, and then kind of learned from John and from being with the series about the presenting side and just putting concerts together and things like that, which I had some experience with Alarm Will Sound, but I wasn't like in charge of it like I was to the level I certainly am with the Southern Exposure. And so I learned a lot from John, and he kind of slowly pulled away from the series. He had done it for quite a while and was ready to move on. And so I took over the series, I guess, in 2014, I think. Probably just not that long before you came to USC.
For me, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm just trying not to screw things up. John set up a good model that I'm trying to adhere to. Hopefully, grow it in different ways. I have started some things, like I started pairing each concert with a local visual artist that sometimes does works that relate to the music that's going to be on the concert, and that the audience can look at and kind of draw connections between visual arts and music, and help bring together like the visual arts and music scenes in Columbia. It's a delight to see how how well the series is received, and we're always usually packing that hall, and
usually
it's not always the same, even in big
stage.
cities, right? We go to play somewhere with Alarm Will Sound, for example, and there may not be as many people there, but I know in Columbia it'd be packed, so it's just that tradition that John started. It has been important. and trying to maintain that, trying to continue to program like really great music with the best artists. I think that takes care of itself. If you got those two things, it's going to be fine. People are going to be engaged by the concert and not scared away by contemporary music, because it certainly does not need to be stuffy or hard to listen to. So, yeah.
Dr. Harley, in your opinion, what is the coolest performance you have ever seen from Southern Exposure?
Yeah, that's really hard. That's like sort of like asking which one of my children is my favorite. But I would say, like, if I had to choose one, there was a concert a number of years ago, just a solo percussionist played a piece by Stockhausen called Himmelstor, or Heaven's Door. And he's the only guy in the United States that I know that plays this piece. It's a big theatrical work that involves literally playing a giant handmade door. So he studied with Stockhausen in Europe. There's a person over there that, initially premiered the piece on this giant door with all these different panels of wood, right? And different kinds of wood and thicknesses. So it'll make different sounds depending on where you hit it. You have to jump up to hit the very top of it. So he had one of these doors handmade in the United States, and he can take it around with him to play this piece. But it's like a concert length piece. Well, it's maybe not, I don't know, I remember if it's 40 minutes, 45 minutes, something like that. It comprised a lot of that concert. And it's just a stunning work of not only musicianship and musicality. The sounds you can get out of it, just a simple thing like that, are pretty amazing, but also theatricality. If you know anything about Stockhausen, you know how theatrical some of his works are. And that, for whatever reason, that was magical, that performance. It was all memorized, the whole piece. The drama of it, the philosophy behind the piece, and there was a personal connection with it, which I think made it particularly impactful for me. At the end of the piece, the percussionist is pounding on the door for a long, long time, and nothing he or she does. The idea is a door is made to open, right? Nothing he did made the door open, of course. And ultimately, the percussionist leaves the stage. And then the directions from Stockhausen say a young child, and I believe it was specified a 6-year-old child or 6 to 8-year-old child or something like that. So it's to walk up on stage and walk to the door. And only then, and you hear this, only then will the door open, right? And the child that we used, because she was the right age and I was sort of connected with children, was one of my daughters, my daughter Ella. So Ella walks up on stage and the door just all of a sudden opens, and you could hear the audience gasp, because it wasn't obvious that the door was made to be able to open anyway, actually. And behind the door are all obscured from the audience still, but are all of these bells and gongs and cymbals, and the percussionist just starts wailing away on all of that metal stuff and makes this most magnificent kind of epiphany to this piece. And people were bawling. I mean, it was pretty, it's kind of an amazing symbolic moment, I think, at the end of what seems like a Herculean undertaking for the percussionist, and again symbolic of kind of deep things. And so I think that was, if I had to choose like one thing, I probably left the hall that night, thinking, it's I don't know if that experience for me personally can be topped. I mean, there's so many though. Like every year there seems to be. Just recently, we had Claire Chase, the flutist, do an incredible concert of a piece called Pan by Marcos Bolter. Again, that was a solo show, all memorized and just unbelievable, playing on every kind of flute imaginable. And and also actually had a theatrical element. Straight up string quartets like the Calder String Quartet, Brooklyn Rider, unbelievable performances. Kartik Shashadri is a Indian Hindustani musician, sitar player, and I just, again, the warmth of his personality and the virtuosity of his playing was just spellbinding and moving and mesmerizing, and just, all of the things that a live concert can give you that a recording can't. So live music is crucial, and just, as you know, it's part of what we do. You feel a connection to people that you just can't simply do, and as an audience member, you experience things so differently than you do just putting on a recording. And so, I want to put on concerts that are about the concert experience to some extent too, and we're gonna take you to places that you couldn't get by just buying a recording and playing it. So
Awesome. Thank you for that. Just one more question to kind of wrap it up. We've talked a lot about just your various commissioning projects and getting new music written for the ensembles. Do you have any advice for people who maybe are trying this out for the first time, trying to get commissions going, consortiums going, that kind of thing, just for their ensembles or for their just solo instrument as well?
Yeah. Well, I think for the first time, hopefully you put yourself in a musical environment where you're surrounded by other good, like-minded people. And I'm sure at Florida State, for example, you are. And your first step, and I imagine you've done this, or anyone in a school, when you're in school, that's the place where you still probably have the most connections.
Mm-hmm.
You got to ask your fellow student composers or even faculty composers to write for you. That's a starting point. And you ideally get a sense for their music and choose someone that you like, but you also have to be aware they're not necessarily going to write that piece that you liked. They're going to do their own thing, and it may become something totally different than you thought they would write, and that's fine too. But I would start there, right? I don't think there's a piece that I've played in that I've had a direct hand in commissioning that didn't start with actually knowing the composer personally in some way or another, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have never kind of cold called a composer and say, hey, I know you have no idea who I am, but would you write me a piece? It always started with some sort of personal connection. And so that's significant. And I know you guys have heard about the importance of personal connections. It really is a small world. And there are a lot of people out there now doing what we're doing. And a lot of young composers that want opportunities to get their music played. Yeah. And hopefully you hit on one that's really gonna go places. I think that's significant. I do think you mentioned the consortium idea, and that's so powerful because that is a great way to raise almost unlimited amounts of money for a composer and for a piece. And it's also, of course, a way to get the piece out there into the music world, because if you got 20 people commissioning it, then probably 20 people are going to at least try to play the thing. Mm-hmm. And so composers love that too, right? And say you each pay $100, you can raise that, of course, or come up with $100 a person, and then you got $2,000, and that's a respectable fee for a short piece, right? By a young composer, for sure. And so, consortium commissioning is the way to go, and a lot of ensembles are doing that too, right? Even the biggest ensembles will get together to commission a piece from Addis, or one of the biggest, most John Adams or whatever, the most expensive composers. Those are often either consortium commissions of some sort, or like a private entity decides to help pay for that piece because they want their name on it. They want to be a part of history in that way. or a granting organization of some kind. So yeah, consortium commissions are invaluable. And finally, like you guys are having kind of like a call for scores, right? And that's great. I mean, you know, you can offer some sort of little prize, as substantial as you can make it ideally, or even just the opportunity to, again, to have the piece played, depending on what level of composers you're after, in terms of not level as in good, but level of established. and you know, calls for scores for, especially for like more novel ensembles like you guys. It's an exciting ensemble to write for that already doesn't have a burgeoning, you know, huge repertoire to draw on, and so that's kind of appealing to a composer too. And so like a call for scores that's associated with some project of yours, that kind of thing is, I think, a great idea, and hopefully you're seeing some benefits from that.
Yeah.
And I don't remember, has it finished yet, or is it still in process, or?
It's still in process. The due date for that is July 1st at 11:59 p.m.
Cool. And don't worry, a lot of those pieces will come in at the very last minute because composers procrastinate, like we all do. So
right.
Yeah. And then again, you know, you want to work hard to just get the news out, of course, about that to all the composers you know, and composition teachers and everyone. They'll pass it on to their students and things like that. So, but yeah, I don't know if that's any like new breathtaking idea about it. If maybe, I'm sure you guys can think of maybe more creative things. You know, there are all these ways to raise money in terms of you know, doing projects that people will donate to depending on what kind of things you do and stuff. But there are all kinds of online crowdfunding sources, right, that are a part of these projects too. And I'm sure you guys are exploring those things too. So if you haven't checked, there's a nice book by Amanda Palmer. And of course I'm blanking now on, but it's about her experience using Kickstarter, right, to raise funds. What is it called? Anyway, she kind of famously was maybe one of the first people to raise like $1 million on Kickstarter, I believe it was, and I don't think it was GoFundMe. I think it was Kickstarter. Something about the power of asking, right? You'd be surprised if you ask. People are often willing to help. And especially in these times, we think about these times as really hard for musicians, but I think they also can provide some opportunities that may not have existed otherwise. And I think you have to be positive about it in that way. And it'll encourage you to be more creative with the resources you have on hand, you know, and maybe inspire you to do some things that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. And maybe inspire people to want to support arts organizations now, because they know it's a hard time for people in the performing arts. So
absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for having me. To
wrap it up, we have one more thing for you, Dr. Harley. We have a lightning round question.
Okay.
This is like a new thing we're starting, so you'll be our guinea pig this week.
Okay.
So Lara's going to pull up a stopwatch and she's going to share the screen with us. And you have a minute to answer these 7, some music, some not, questions.
Okay.
Okay. And, oh geez. So now I have to pull up these questions. Hold on one second. Okay. Ready, Lara? All right. So, first question. Favorite composer?
John Adams.
Least favorite bassoon excerpt?
Ravel Piano Concerto.
Me too. Favorite bassoon excerpt?
Scheherazade.
Coolest thing that you've done during quarantine?
Watch tons of television with my daughters.
Perfect. Favorite color?
Favorite color? Green.
If you could play any other instrument, which would you choose?
Well, the cello, of course.
Of course.
That's what we'd all play, right?
Oh,
Uh-oh.
Did we
Bridget's
lose?
blanking.
We lost Bridget.
We lost.
I'm
Favorite candy bar.
Favorite candy bar.
Thank you, Amy.
Oh, it's the one. It's not the Milky Way. It's Three Musketeers.
Weirdest extended technique you've ever been asked to employ.
Singing while playing.
Woo. All right.
I knew that's what he was going to say.
Did I get them all?
You got them all. Yeah, you did it.
All right. Awesome.
Even with our technical difficulties.
Sorry,
No,
I was-
it's fine. It worked
Yeah,
out
I was
okay.
I was muted, and then I didn't do the countdown, and yeah, it was fun. Anyway, good thing it started. I got it eventually.
It started. It was good. I like that. That was nice.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Harley. I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say that it was a pleasure to have you. And I hope all of our viewers enjoyed this happy hour talk, and we'll see you all next week.
Cool. Well, thanks for
Yeah.
having me.
Great.
Congratulations.
Thank you so
guys.
much.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
All right.
you.
Take care.
Bye.